If she used the herbs tonight, she might not survive the next winter illness herself. The thought followed Emma Brooks through the snow-covered forest as the wind howled between the pines. Twilight was fading quickly, and the narrow trail home had nearly disappeared beneath fresh snowfall. She tightened her worn coat around her shoulders and adjusted the basket hanging from her arm. Inside rested several bundles of healing herbs she had spent weeks gathering, drying, and preserving. They were not valuable because they were rare. They were valuable because they were all she had left. Emma lived alone on the edge of Silver Creek territory in a small cabin surrounded by forest. Most wolves barely remembered she existed. A few remembered and chose not to care. Years earlier, she had studied traditional herbal remedies under an elderly healer who believed every life deserved compassion. After the healer passed away, Emma inherited little more than a collection of books, a tiny cabin, and knowledge that few people appreciated anymore. Modern healers preferred expensive treatments. Wealthy families visited professional clinics. Emma treated whoever could not afford either, which meant she was usually paid with gratitude instead of money. The cold wind grew stronger as she continued walking. Snowflakes swirled across the path, reducing visibility to only a few yards. She lowered her head and focused on reaching home before darkness completely settled over the forest. Then she heard it, a sound carried by the wind. Weak, faint, almost impossible to notice. Emma stopped walking. For several seconds, she listened carefully. Nothing, only the storm. She took another step. The sound came again. This time she recognized it immediately. Someone was breathing heavily nearby. Her pulse quickened. Most wolves would continue walking. The forest after sunset could be dangerous during winter storms. Yet Emma changed direction without hesitation. She followed the sound through thick snow until she reached a small clearing between several pine trees. There, partially covered by snow, lay a man. He appeared unconscious. His dark clothing was torn and weathered. Snow had gathered across his shoulders and hair. From a distance, he looked like a rogue traveler who had become trapped during the storm. Emma immediately knelt beside him. His skin felt cold. His breathing was shallow. Most concerning of all was the strange discoloration visible along one side of his neck and collarbone. Emma frowned. She had seen something similar years ago. Silver poisoning. Not severe enough to be fatal yet, but serious enough to become dangerous if ignored. She looked around the empty forest. No one else was coming. No one else even knew he was here. The man stirred slightly, but did not open his eyes. Emma's stomach tightened. Carrying him home would be difficult. Treating him would be even harder. The herbs required for silver poisoning happened to be the same herbs she had been saving for herself. Throughout the previous year, she had carefully gathered enough medicine to survive future illnesses. If she used them now, replacing them before spring would be nearly impossible. She looked down at the stranger again. Snow continued accumulating across his clothing. Leaving him here would be easy. Rational, even. Nobody would blame her. She owed him nothing. Yet the elderly healer who had raised her voice seemed to echo through memory. Compassion means helping when it costs something. Otherwise, it is merely convenience. Emma closed her eyes briefly. Then she sighed. You picked a terrible place to collapse. The unconscious man offered no response. Nearly an hour later, after exhausting effort through deep snow, Emma finally managed to bring him back to her cabin. She built up the fire, removed his soaked outer layers, wrapped him in blankets, and prepared warm water. Throughout it all, the stranger remained unconscious. Once everything else was done, Emma opened a wooden storage box resting beneath her table. Inside were the herbs. Months of work. Months of preparation. Her final reserve. She stared at them for a long moment. Then she carefully removed several bundles and began crushing them into a healing mixture. The decision hurt more than she expected. Not because she regretted it, because she understood exactly what it might cost her later. As the medicine simmered above the fire, the stranger's eyes opened slightly for the first time. Through blurred vision, he watched the young Omega moving around the cabin. He noticed the modest surroundings, the nearly empty shelves, the small amount of food, and the herbs she had just sacrificed. Alpha King Mason Blackwood remained perfectly still. His disguise as an injured rogue had already revealed more than weeks of official reports. Yet as he watched Emma use the last of her precious medicine on someone she believed was a complete stranger, one realization became impossible to ignore. She had just given away something she desperately needed herself. Emma remained awake most of the night. The storm outside gradually weakened, but the man resting in her small cabin continued drifting in and out of consciousness. Every few hours she checked his temperature, refreshed the herbal mixture, and adjusted the blankets surrounding him. The medicine was working, slowly, but working. Each time she added another portion of herbs to the simmering pot, she felt a small ache in her chest. Not regret, just awareness. With every handful she used, her own emergency supply grew smaller. By dawn, less than half remained. Pale winter sunlight slipped through the cabin window as Emma carried a fresh cup of herbal tea toward the bed. This time, the stranger's eyes were open, clear, alert, watching her. For a brief moment neither spoke. "Good," Emma finally said. "You are awake." Mason studied her carefully. During the previous night, while pretending to remain weaker than he truly was, he had observed almost everything. He saw how often she checked on him. He noticed how little food remained on her shelves. He noticed the way she quietly counted the remaining herbs each time she passed the storage box. Nothing about her kindness appeared performative. No one else was there to witness it. "You found me in the forest," he said. Emma nodded. "Near the northern ridge." Mason looked toward the fire. "You should have left me there." The answer came immediately. "No, why not?" Emma placed the tea beside him. "Because you needed help." Mason almost smiled. The simplicity of the answer felt strangely familiar. During his travels throughout the kingdom, he had asked dozens of people similar questions. Most offered complicated explanations. Emma never did. "You do not know anything about me," he said. "That is true. I could be dangerous." "You could." She sat across from him near the fireplace. "But you are not." Mason raised an eyebrow. "How can you be sure?" Emma shrugged lightly. "People reveal themselves when they believe nobody is paying attention." The response surprised him. Not because it was wrong, because it mirrored the exact reason he had begun this entire journey. Silence settled between them. Outside, snow slid gently from tree branches as sunlight brightened the forest. Inside, the cabin remained warm despite its modest size. Mason's eyes drifted toward a shelf holding several worn books. "You are a healer." "Something like that." "Something like that?" Emma smiled faintly. "Most people would not call me a healer." "Why not?" She hesitated. "Because most people prefer expensive clinics and official certifications." Mason glanced around the room. "And yet they still come to you." Emma looked genuinely surprised. "How do you know that?" "The shelves." He nodded towards several jars waiting to be refilled. "People only return when something works." For the first time, a genuine laugh escaped her. The sound felt lighter than anything he had heard since arriving. Throughout the morning, Emma continued her usual routine. She prepared food, cleaned the cabin, sorted dried plants, and checked on her patient. Mason offered to help several times. Each offer was rejected. "You can barely stand," she told him. "I can stand perfectly well." He immediately proved himself wrong by nearly losing his balance. Emma caught his arm before he fell. "Thank you for demonstrating my point." Another reluctant smile touched his face. As the day progressed, visitors occasionally stopped by the cabin. An elderly wolf arrived needing help identifying medicinal roots. A young mother sought advice about a persistent cough affecting her child. Emma welcomed each person patiently. She listened. She helped. She charged almost nothing. After the final visitor left, Mason finally asked the question bothering him most. "How do you survive?" Emma blinked. "What do you mean?" "You spend your days helping everyone else." He gestured toward the door. "Most of them pay very little." Her expression softened. "Enough." Mason looked toward the nearly empty pantry. "That does not appear accurate." Emma followed his gaze. For a moment, something vulnerable crossed her face. "Some winters are harder than others." The answer revealed far more than she intended. Mason remained quiet. He already knew the truth. She was struggling. Yet somehow she continued giving away the very resources she needed most. That evening, while Emma prepared dinner, he noticed her open the storage box again. Only a few bundles of healing herbs remained, far fewer than before. She stared at them briefly before closing the lid. The movement was subtle. Most people would never notice it. Mason did. And for the first time since beginning his secret investigation, something unexpected happened. He stopped thinking about Emma as part of a test. Because every hour spent inside that cabin made one fact increasingly impossible to ignore. She was not simply kind. She was sacrificing her own security for someone she believed had nothing to offer her. As darkness settled outside, and the fire crackled softly beside them, Alpha King Mason Blackwood realized he was learning far more from Emma Brooks than she could ever learn from him. 3 days passed before Mason was strong enough to leave the cabin for more than a few minutes at a time. The winter weather had improved, replacing heavy storms with clear skies and bright sunlight reflecting across endless blankets of snow. Emma considered this a blessing. The herbs had done their work. The symptoms she believed were caused by silver poisoning had gradually faded, and the stranger's strength seemed to return a little more each day. What she did not realize was that the Alpha King had never been in as much danger as she assumed. The illness had been carefully exaggerated as part of his secret journey through the kingdom. Yet watching Emma sacrifice nearly everything to help him created a problem he had not expected. For the first time, he felt guilty about the deception. That morning, Emma sat at her small wooden table reviewing several pages from an old herbal journal. Mason watched from across the room. The cabin remained quiet except for the crackling fireplace and occasional wind brushing against the walls. "You have read that same page 3 times, he observed. Emma looked up. "Have I? At least." She sighed and closed the journal. "I am trying to solve a problem." "What kind of problem?" Her eyes drifted toward the storage box beneath the table. Mason already knew the answer. "The herbs," he said. Emma offered a faint smile. "You notice more than most people. There are not many left." The smile disappeared. No, neither spoke for several seconds. Finally, Emma shrugged. "Spring is only a few months away. I will manage." Mason glanced toward the nearly empty shelves. The statement sounded optimistic rather than realistic. Yet she spoke with such calm acceptance that arguing felt impossible. Later that afternoon, Emma left to visit an elderly resident who needed medicine. Mason volunteered to carry supplies and accompany her. This time she agreed. Together, they followed a narrow path through the forest until the trees opened onto a small cluster of homes near Silver Creek Village. The moment they entered the area, Mason noticed something interesting. Several people greeted Emma warmly. Others barely acknowledged her existence. The contrast was impossible to miss. At the first cottage, an elderly woman welcomed Emma with genuine affection. "You came," she said with obvious relief. "Of course." Emma smiled. "I brought the treatment we discussed." For nearly an hour, she patiently explained instructions, prepared remedies, and answered questions. When the visit ended, the older woman attempted to hand her a few coins. Emma accepted only half. Mason watched silently. "Why did you not take the rest?" he asked once they resumed walking. "Because she needs it more than I do." Mason looked around the snowy road. "I am beginning to suspect that is your answer to everything." Emma laughed softly. "Maybe." Their next stop produced a very different experience. A wealthy merchant's wife requested assistance identifying several medicinal plants. When Emma arrived, she waited nearly 20 minutes before being invited inside. The woman barely looked at her during the conversation. No thank you. No appreciation. No courtesy beyond basic politeness. As they left, Mason frowned. That woman was rude. Emma seemed unsurprised. She has always been that way. Then why help her? Because she needed help. The answer arrived so quickly that Mason could not help smiling. Every road somehow led back to the same principle. By late afternoon, they stopped near the village square where several residents were gathering around a public notice board. Curious, Emma approached. A new announcement had been posted. Citizens were invited to attend a future royal gathering scheduled several weeks away. The notice carried the official seal of the Alpha King. Excited conversations immediately spread throughout the crowd. Emma barely reacted. "You are not interested?" Mason asked. "Important people discussing important things." She smiled. "That has never involved me before." Mason studied her expression. There was no bitterness in her voice. Only acceptance. Somehow that made the comment even sadder. As evening approached, they returned to the cabin. The sky glowed orange and gold above the snow-covered forest. For a while neither spoke. Then Emma suddenly stopped walking. Ahead of them stood a young wolf struggling to repair a broken wagon wheel beside the road. Several others had already passed without stopping. Emma immediately changed direction. "Of course," Mason muttered quietly. "What?" she asked. "Nothing." Together, they spent nearly an hour helping the young man finish repairs. By the time they finally resumed their journey, darkness had begun settling across the trees. Yet the delay did not seem to bother Emma. Helping someone had improved her mood. Mason noticed that too. As the cabin came into view, he found himself thinking about everything he had witnessed during the past several days. The generosity, the patience, the consistency. Emma behaved the same whether people appreciated her or ignored her entirely. Most wolves changed depending on who was watching. She never did. And as the last sunlight disappeared beyond the forest, Alpha King Mason Blackwood quietly made another decision. The test was no longer about discovering what kind of kingdom he ruled. It was becoming about showing the kingdom exactly what kind of person they had failed to value. The next morning arrived wrapped in silence. Fresh snow covered the forest in a smooth blanket of white, and sunlight filtered through the trees like pale gold. Emma stood outside her cabin gathering firewood, while Mason watched from the doorway. He had recovered enough strength to travel if he wished. In truth, he could have left days ago. Yet each morning brought another reason to stay. Every hour revealed something new about the Omega, who seemed determined to place everyone else's needs before her own. Emma carried an armful of wood inside and immediately noticed him watching. "You should not be standing in the cold." Mason smiled. "You say that every day." "Because every day you ignore me." "Perhaps I enjoy hearing it." Emma rolled her eyes and returned to organizing supplies. The familiar routine comforted her. Life had never been easy, but routines made difficult things manageable. Feed the fire. Prepare remedies. Visit patients. Gather herbs when weather allowed. Repeat. It was not glamorous. It was simply her life. Later that morning, a knock sounded at the cabin door. Emma opened it to find a middle-aged woman standing outside. The woman looked uncomfortable. "I need help," she admitted. Emma immediately stepped aside. "Come in." Mason remained silent as the visitor explained that her son had developed a persistent fever. Emma listened carefully, prepared a small treatment bundle, and explained exactly how it should be used. The woman accepted everything gratefully. Then came the familiar moment. "How much do I owe you?" Emma glanced at the worried expression on the woman's face. "Nothing." "Emma, take care of your son." The woman left with tears of relief in her eyes. Once the door closed, Mason looked toward the nearly empty shelves. "You gave away the last of that medicine." Emma nodded. "Yes. Will you replace it?" "Eventually." Mason frowned. "What if someone else needs it tomorrow?" Emma smiled faintly. "Then I will find another solution." Her answer frustrated him for reasons he could not fully explain. Not because she was wrong, because she seemed completely willing to carry burdens that should have been shared by an entire community. That afternoon, Mason decided to learn more. While Emma visited patients in the village, he quietly walked through Silver Creek alone. His disguise remained intact. To everyone else, he was still an ordinary rogue recovering from illness. He stopped near the general store and listened as several residents discussed local matters. Before long, Emma's name entered the conversation. "She works too hard," one older wolf said. "Always has." Another shrugged. "Nobody asked her to." "Nobody asks the sun to rise either," the first replied. "Some things just happen because they are reliable." The conversation continued. Mason listened carefully. Not everyone spoke kindly. Some dismissed Emma as naive. Others viewed her generosity as weakness. Yet even those critics admitted one thing. Whenever someone truly needed help, Emma appeared. The realization followed Mason throughout the afternoon. By the time he returned to the cabin, he understood something important. The territory depended on Emma far more than it realized. Her kindness had quietly become part of the foundation holding the community together. Yet very few people seemed willing to acknowledge it. As evening approached, Emma returned carrying a small basket containing only a few vegetables and pieces of bread. Mason immediately noticed how little food remained. "That is dinner?" he asked. Emma looked down at the basket. "And breakfast if I am careful." "You used your money for medicine again." She did not answer. She did not need to. The silence confirmed everything. For several moments, Mason stared at the basket, then at the shelves, then at the storage box containing only a handful of remaining herbs. Finally, he looked at Emma. "Why do you keep doing this?" he asked quietly. She paused while placing food on the table. "Doing what?" "Choosing everyone else." The question lingered in the room. Emma considered it carefully before answering. "Because someone once chose me." Mason remained silent. She continued. "Years ago, when I had nothing, an elderly healer took me in. She taught me everything I know. She never asked what she would gain from helping me." Emma's eyes softened with memory. "If kindness saved my life, then maybe it can save someone else's too." The fire crackled gently between them. Outside, snow drifted through the darkness. Inside, Mason felt something shift. Reports, investigations, and observations had taught him many things about his kingdom. Yet none of them explained leadership as clearly as that single sentence. And as Emma quietly divided the last pieces of bread into 2 equal portions, Alpha King Mason Blackwood realized that the woman everyone overlooked possessed a wisdom many rulers spent their entire lives searching for. The following week brought clearer weather and longer daylight hours, but life inside Emma's cabin became increasingly difficult in ways she tried hard to hide. The remaining herbs had almost disappeared. Several storage jars sat empty. The pantry contained only enough food for a few more days. Yet every morning she woke before sunrise and continued helping anyone who arrived at her door. Mason noticed everything. He noticed how she measured ingredients more carefully. He noticed how often she claimed she was not hungry. He noticed how she quietly placed larger portions onto his plate whenever they shared meals. The more he observed, the more impossible it became to view her kindness as simple generosity. It was sacrifice, real sacrifice. One cold morning, Emma prepared to travel into Silver Creek Village to gather supplies. "You should stay here and rest," she told Mason while wrapping a scarf around her neck. "I am fully recovered." "That is exactly what stubborn people always say." Mason laughed softly. "And what do healers always say?" Emma opened the door. "Things that keep stubborn people alive." The answer followed him long after she disappeared down the snowy trail. Instead of remaining behind, Mason left the cabin an hour later and began a different journey. His purpose was simple. He wanted to continue the investigation that had originally brought him to this territory. Disguised as an ordinary rogue, he visited merchants, community leaders, and respected pack members throughout the village. What he discovered disappointed him. At one large estate, he asked whether temporary work might be available for a traveler struggling to survive the winter. The owner dismissed him before he finished speaking. At another property, a wealthy merchant spoke proudly about supporting the community but refused to spare even a loaf of bread for someone in need. Throughout the day, similar encounters repeated themselves. The wolves with the most resources often displayed the least compassion. Meanwhile, Emma continued moving through the village helping others. Their paths crossed briefly near the market square. She was carrying a basket filled with medicinal supplies she had somehow managed to acquire. "Did you finally buy herbs for yourself?" Mason asked hopefully. Emma hesitated. "Not exactly." His expression darkened immediately. "Emma." She smiled guiltily. "A family needed medicine for their daughter. So you gave away the supplies again." "She was sick." Mason closed his eyes briefly. Every conversation seemed to end the same way. "One day," he said, "you are going to learn how to put yourself first." Emma adjusted the basket. "And one day you are going to stop worrying so much." Before he could respond, she continued toward another patient waiting across the village. The encounter left him strangely frustrated. Not because she was wrong, because she genuinely seemed incapable of valuing herself the way she valued everyone else. Later that afternoon, while speaking with several residents near the community center, Mason finally heard the full story of Emma's past. Years earlier, her family had owned a successful farm. Hard seasons and financial losses gradually destroyed everything they built. Friends disappeared. Opportunities vanished. After losing her parents, Emma remained behind while many people quietly forgot she existed. "Most wolves would have become bitter," one elderly resident admitted. Emma never did. Another nodded. If anything, she became kinder. Those words stayed with Mason throughout the evening. By the time he returned to the cabin, snow had begun falling again. Warm light glowed through the windows. Inside, Emma sat beside the fireplace, sorting the last few bundles of herbs. The sight struck him harder than expected. There were only 3 small bundles left. 3. The entire supply she had spent months collecting had nearly vanished because she chose to save a stranger. She looked up and smiled when he entered. "You are late." Mason removed his coat. "I was learning about you." Her smile faded slightly. "That sounds dangerous." "Apparently, you have been helping this territory for years." Emma returned her attention to the herbs. "Many people help. Not like you." Silence filled the room. Finally, she spoke quietly. "Why are you so interested in me?" The question caught him off guard. Because the truthful answer was becoming increasingly complicated. At first, she had simply been part of his investigation. Then she became someone remarkable. Now she had become something else entirely. someone he respected, someone he admired, someone who had changed the way he viewed leadership itself. Yet he could not reveal any of that. Not yet. Because, he answered carefully, I think most people have underestimated you. Emma stared into the fire for several moments. That is all right. Why? Her eyes reflected the dancing flames. Because being underestimated does not change who I am. Mason felt the weight of those words settle over the room. Outside, snow continued falling across Silver Creek territory. Inside, the Alpha King quietly reached a conclusion that would soon change both their lives. The kingdom needed to see what he had seen. It needed to understand what kind of person Emma Brooks truly was. And for the first time since beginning his secret journey, he started planning exactly how he would reveal the truth. The morning after Mason reached his decision began unlike any other. Before sunrise, while Emma was still asleep, he stood alone outside the cabin beneath a sky filled with fading stars. The forest was silent except for the distant sound of wind moving through snow-covered branches. For several minutes, he simply looked at the small home that had changed everything. He had arrived as part of an investigation. He was leaving with a completely different understanding of his kingdom. By the time Emma awoke, Mason had already returned inside and was helping prepare breakfast. She immediately noticed something unusual. You seem distracted, she said while arranging cups on the table. Do I? More than usual. Mason smiled. Perhaps I am thinking about the future. Emma laughed softly. That sounds dangerous. Yet as the morning passed, she began noticing other things. He asked more questions than normal. He seemed to study every detail of the cabin as though trying to remember it. Several times she caught him looking toward the forest trail leading away from the property. A strange feeling settled in her chest. By afternoon, she finally asked the question directly. Are you leaving? Mason looked up from the chair beside the fireplace. For a moment, he considered avoiding the truth. Instead, he nodded. Soon. Emma lowered her eyes. She had expected the answer, but hearing it still felt different. You are fully recovered now. Thanks to you. She forced a smile. Then that is good. Yet neither of them sounded entirely convinced. The remainder of the day passed quietly. Emma visited several patients while Mason accompanied her. Everywhere they went, he observed the same pattern. People welcomed her help, relied upon her knowledge, benefited from her generosity. Yet few seemed to recognize the personal cost behind those actions. One elderly resident hugged Emma before they left and whispered, "This village would be lost without you." The words stayed with Mason, because they were true. That evening, as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, a rider entered Silver Creek Village carrying royal colors. News spread quickly. Official notices were posted throughout the territory. Every citizen was ordered to attend a kingdom gathering in 10 days. No explanation was given. Only the royal seal accompanied the message. Excitement immediately filled the village. Speculation followed. Merchants discussed possible policy changes. Elders debated political developments. Emma barely paid attention. Royal matters felt very far removed from her life. When she returned home after dark, she found Mason standing near the doorway with his travel bag resting beside him. Her heart sank instantly. You are leaving tonight. It was not a question. Mason nodded slowly. For several seconds, neither spoke. The cabin suddenly felt much quieter than usual. I suppose I should thank you, he said. Emma folded her arms. You already thanked me. Not enough. She looked away toward the fire. You do not owe me anything. That is where you are wrong. His voice carried unusual weight. Emma frowned slightly, but could not understand why. Mason stepped closer. Everything I needed to learn, I found here. The statement confused her. You make it sound like you were searching for something. A faint smile touched his face. Maybe I was. The answer only deepened the mystery. Outside, snow drifted softly beneath the moonlight. Inside, neither seemed eager for the conversation to end. Finally, Emma reached into a cabinet and removed a small cloth bundle. Take these. Mason accepted it carefully. Inside were several dried medicinal leaves. Emma, these are valuable. Not as valuable as staying healthy. He stared at the gift. Once again, she was giving away something she could barely afford to lose. Even now, even after everything. You never stop helping people, do you? Emma smiled. You are people. The answer nearly made him laugh. After a long silence, Mason shouldered his bag and moved toward the door. Attend the gathering, he said. Everyone has been summoned. Emma raised an eyebrow. You sound unusually certain. Trust me. She opened the door for him. Cold air rushed inside. For a brief moment, neither moved. Then Mason extended his hand. Emma shook it, yet somehow the gesture felt insufficient. "Goodbye," she said quietly. "For now," he replied. The words caught her attention immediately. Before she could ask what he meant, he stepped into the darkness. Emma stood in the doorway, watching his figure disappear among the snow-covered trees. Eventually, she closed the door and returned to the fireplace. The cabin felt emptier than it should have. Meanwhile, several miles away, Mason reached a hidden meeting point deep within the forest. Waiting there were royal guards dressed in black and silver. The moment they saw him, every guard dropped to one knee. Their king had returned. Mason removed the last pieces of his disguise and looked back toward the distant glow of Emma's cabin. In 10 days, the entire kingdom would learn the truth. And for the first time since beginning his journey, he found himself wondering whether Emma Brooks would ever forgive him for the secret he had kept. 10 days passed more quickly than Emma expected. The morning of the royal gathering arrived cold and bright, with sunlight shining across miles of fresh snow. Silver Creek territory buzzed with anticipation as villagers traveled toward the central assembly grounds. Merchants wore their finest coats. Community leaders gathered in small groups discussing rumors. Families arrived early hoping to secure good places near the front. Emma almost did not attend. The journey required time she could have spent helping patients, and royal ceremonies rarely affected her life. Yet she remembered Mason's final words. Attend the gathering. For reasons she could not explain, the memory stayed with her. By late morning, she stood near the back of a massive crowd assembled before an elevated platform decorated with banners bearing the royal crest. Hundreds of wolves filled the grounds. Perhaps thousands. The scale alone was overwhelming. Emma kept to herself, hoping to remain unnoticed. Trumpets suddenly echoed across the valley. Conversations stopped immediately. Every head turned toward the platform. Royal guards emerged first, dressed in black and silver uniforms that gleamed beneath the winter sun. Advisors followed. Elders followed. Then silence settled over the entire gathering as a tall figure appeared at the top of the grand staircase. Emma froze. Her heart stopped for a single terrifying second. She knew that face. The dark hair. The familiar eyes. The calm expression. Yet everything else was different. Gone were the worn clothes and weathered appearance of a wandering rogue. In their place stood a king. A crown rested upon his head. Silver-embroidered formal attire marked his rank. Confidence surrounded him like an invisible force. The stranger she had rescued from the snow was Alpha King Mason Blackwood. A gasp escaped her lips before she could stop it. Around her, the crowd erupted into applause. Emma barely heard any of it. Her mind raced through every conversation they had shared beside the fireplace. Every meal, every smile, every question. The realization struck with overwhelming force. He had known exactly who he was the entire time. Mason stepped forward and raised one hand. The crowd became silent. His voice carried effortlessly across the assembly grounds. Citizens of Silver Creek territory, during the past several months, I traveled throughout my kingdom without revealing my identity. Murmurs spread through the audience. I wish to see my people as they truly are, not as they behave before a throne. The crowd listened carefully. Some looked curious. Others appeared nervous. Mason continued. I visited wealthy estates. I visited prosperous merchants. I visited respected community leaders. I asked for very little. A meal, shelter, basic kindness. The silence deepened. What I discovered taught me many lessons. His gaze moved across the crowd. Some wolves possessed great resources, but little compassion. Others possessed very little and still chose generosity. Emma felt her pulse quicken. Somewhere deep inside, she already knew where this was going. Mason paused before speaking again. During a winter storm, I collapsed near the edge of this territory while disguised as a rogue traveler suffering from illness. A wave of whispers swept through the audience. One person found me. One person carried me through deep snow. One person sacrificed valuable medicine she had spent months collecting. Mason's eyes searched the crowd until they found Emma. The moment their gazes met, everything else seemed to disappear. That person was Emma Brooks. The reaction was immediate. Hundreds of heads turned toward her. Emma wished the snow would open beneath her feet and swallow her whole. Yet she remained frozen in place. Mason's voice softened slightly. Emma believed she was helping a stranger. She had no reason to expect gratitude, no reason to expect reward, no reason to believe anyone would ever learn what she had done. Complete silence covered the gathering grounds. She used her last healing herbs to save someone she thought had nothing to offer her. Several villagers lowered their eyes. Others stared at Emma with open astonishment. Many were only now realizing how much she had quietly sacrificed for years. Mason stepped forward once more. The kingdom needs more examples of character like hers. He turned toward his advisors. One stepped forward carrying a royal document sealed with gold wax. The sight instantly captured everyone's attention. Emma felt her heart pounding harder than ever. Whatever came next, she knew her life would never be the same again. The royal document gleamed beneath the winter sunlight as the advisor carried it toward the center of the platform. Thousands of eyes followed its movement. Emma stood motionless among the crowd, barely aware of the cold air surrounding her. Her thoughts remained trapped between two impossible realities. The first was that the rogue she had rescued from the forest was actually Alpha King Mason Blackwood. The second was that he was now telling the entire kingdom about her. Neither felt real. Mason accepted the document and waited for the crowd to become completely silent once more. When he finally spoke, his voice carried calm authority across the gathering grounds. Many leaders believe strength comes from power. Others believe it comes from wealth. He paused briefly. I disagree. The audience listened carefully. True strength appears when someone chooses kindness despite hardship. It appears when compassion costs something. It appears when integrity remains unchanged even when nobody is watching. Several elders nodded. Others lowered their eyes as though reflecting on their own choices. Mason slowly opened the document. Emma Brooks demonstrated those qualities repeatedly. The words echoed through the valley. Not once, not twice, repeatedly. He looked directly toward her. The healing herbs she used were not ordinary supplies. They represented months of preparation, months of work, months of security she sacrificed for a stranger. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Many villagers had never known how difficult Emma's circumstances truly were. They knew she helped others. They did not understand how much it cost her. Mason continued. Even after those herbs were gone, she continued helping her community. Even when her shelves were nearly empty. Even when her own future remained uncertain. The silence that followed felt different from before. It carried respect, understanding. For the first time, people were not merely hearing Emma's story. They were recognizing its meaning. The Alpha King then raised the document slightly. Therefore, by royal decree, Emma Brooks is hereby appointed royal healer and community advisor for Silver Creek territory. The reaction was immediate. Gasps filled the crowd. Several advisors exchanged approving smiles. Community leaders stared in surprise. Emma herself could barely breathe. Royal healer. The title felt impossible. Mason was not finished. This appointment includes full funding for a new healing center, educational resources, medical supplies, and support staff. More astonished whispers swept through the gathering. No healer should have to choose between helping others and surviving themselves. That statement struck the crowd with particular force, because everyone knew exactly who he was talking about. Emma felt tears threatening to form, but she quickly blinked them away. She had spent years asking for nothing, years expecting nothing. Now everything seemed to be changing at once. Mason stepped down from the platform and began walking toward her. The crowd immediately parted. A path opened through hundreds of people. Emma remained frozen where she stood. Every step he took seemed to make the moment more unreal. When he finally stopped in front of her, the gathering grounds became completely silent. Emma Brooks, he said softly enough that only those closest could hear clearly. Would you accept this appointment? For a moment she could not answer. Her mind flashed through countless memories. Long winters, empty shelves, endless hours helping strangers. The tiny cabin, the old healer who raised her, the storm that changed everything. Finally she nodded. Yes. Applause erupted across the valley. It began near the front rows before spreading outward until thousands of voices joined together. Emma looked around in disbelief. Some people were smiling. Others appeared emotional. Several who had ignored her for years now looked genuinely ashamed. Yet she felt no anger toward them, only gratitude. Mason handed her the official document. As she accepted it, he smiled. It was the same smile she remembered from evenings beside the fireplace. Not the smile of a king, the smile of the man she thought she had saved in the forest. "There is one more thing," he said quietly. Emma looked up. "What?" Mason glanced toward the crowd before answering. "You spent months healing someone who was not entirely honest with you." A faint laugh escaped her despite everything. That is certainly one way to describe it. For the first time that day, genuine amusement appeared in his eyes. Around them, applause continued echoing through the winter air. Yet beneath the celebration, something else had changed. The kingdom had finally seen what Mason had discovered weeks earlier. They had finally recognized the value of someone they overlooked for far too long. And as the crowd celebrated, Emma realized the greatest reward was not the title. It was knowing that kindness had not gone unseen after all. Spring arrived slowly across Silver Creek territory, melting the last traces of winter and revealing fields of green beneath the snow. For Emma Brooks, the season brought changes she never could have imagined. Construction on the new healing center began almost immediately after the royal gathering. What once seemed impossible now stood before her every day in the form of workers, supplies, shelves of medicine, and volunteers eager to learn. Yet despite the title, the recognition, and the resources now available to her, Emma remained exactly the same person she had always been. Each morning she arrived before everyone else. Each evening she left only after making certain every patient had received care. The difference was that she no longer had to choose between helping others and surviving herself. For the first time in many years, she could do both. The healing center quickly became one of the most respected institutions in the territory. Families traveled from neighboring villages seeking advice. Young apprentices arrived hoping to study traditional remedies. Elderly residents who once worried about being forgotten now found support whenever they needed it. Everywhere Emma looked, she saw evidence that kindness could create change far beyond a single moment. One afternoon, several months after the gathering, she stood outside the center watching children play beneath the warm sunlight when a familiar voice spoke behind her. "You built something remarkable." Emma turned and smiled. Alpha King Mason Blackwood stood nearby, without formal guards or ceremony. Although he still carried the presence of a ruler, she occasionally caught glimpses of the traveler she had first met during a storm. "We built it," she corrected. Mason shook his head. "I provided resources. You provided the reason." Emma laughed softly. "You always know how to make an ordinary conversation sound important. Perhaps because some conversations are." They walked together along a nearby path overlooking the village. Below them, people moved through the streets carrying supplies, greeting neighbors, and enjoying the warmth of the season. The territory felt different now, more connected, more hopeful. Mason noticed it too. "Do you know what surprised me most?" he asked. Emma glanced at him. "What?" "Not that the healing center succeeded." He looked toward the horizon. "I expected that." "Then what surprised you?" A faint smile appeared on his face. "How many people were inspired by your example?" Emma followed his gaze toward the village. She remembered the day of the gathering, the shock, the attention, the overwhelming recognition. At the time, she believed the event had changed only her own life. Now she understood it had done much more. Community programs expanded throughout the region. Volunteer groups formed in neighboring territories. Wolves who once remained indifferent had begun helping one another more often. Not because they were ordered to, because they had been reminded that kindness mattered. As summer approached, the kingdom continued changing in small but meaningful ways. New healers completed training. Families received better support. Elderly residents gained access to services they previously lacked. And through it all, Emma continued doing what she had always done. She listened. She cared. She helped. One evening, nearly a year after the storm that started everything, she returned to her original cabin at the edge of the forest. The building remained exactly as she remembered. The small fireplace, the wooden table, the shelves that had once stood nearly empty. Memories filled every corner. A knock sounded at the door. Smiling, Emma opened it. Mason stood outside, holding a small cloth bundle. Immediately, she recognized the gesture. "That looks familiar," she said. "I thought you might." He handed her the bundle. Inside were carefully preserved healing herbs, the same type she had sacrificed long ago. Emma stared at them before looking up. "You remembered." Mason smiled. "Some things are worth remembering." For a moment neither spoke. Warm evening light filtered through the trees surrounding the cabin. Birds sang somewhere beyond the forest. The world felt peaceful, complete. Finally, Emma looked toward the herbs resting in her hands. You know, she said quietly, when I found you in the snow, I thought I was saving one life. Mason nodded. And instead, Emma smiled. Instead, it feels like we changed many. The Alpha King looked across the forest and the thriving territory beyond it. That is the interesting thing about kindness, he said. You never really know how far it travels. Years later, people throughout the kingdom would continue telling the story of the healer and the hidden king. Not because it involved a crown. Not because it involved a royal decree. They remembered it because it revealed a simple truth. The greatest acts of courage are often quiet. The strongest hearts are often overlooked. And sometimes a single act of compassion given to a stranger can change the future of an entire kingdom.